All right, everybody, good morning. Thanks for coming in. It's an amazing room. So let me do a context switch for myself on this. Part of my job at Microsoft is dealing with the broad technical community inside of our field organization, which is about 20,000 people, highly distributed around the world, in every country where we have lots of people, in countries where we have some people like here, and in countries where we have one or two people like Angola. And one of the challenges that we're faced with all the time is how do you grow technical careers, and what does it mean to be a technical leader? Concurrent with that is actually a similar topic around what does it mean to be an architect. And so we've spent a tremendous amount of time thinking through some of those questions and have put a deck together that we use internally. So essentially what you're going to see over here is some information that we use internally. And this is used in the services business, so with our consulting groups or with our technical sales folks, with the technical evangelists, to help them understand what it is that we think is a technical leader. And it really gets into the view of the behaviors. What are the behaviors that we expect from leaders? And the essence of what's in this message is if you're the best BizTalk guy, or if you're the best SQL Server DBA, it doesn't make you a leader. It just makes you the best DBA. Or the best BizTalk guy. So what is leadership and what does it mean? And this deck has actually been built over several years looking at 20,000 people and sampling the behaviors that we see from some great people and really trying to understand how that works. So again, this is pretty much what we use internally unedited. It's a fairly long deck, and I will leave the deck behind. You're welcome to take the slides and look at them, but I will jump through as we get to some of the behaviors quite a lot about that. So if we start off on the architecture side, one of the things that I said this morning was that we're in this era of architectural discontinuities. That's actually the gist of what I said this morning. And in effect, the architectural discontinuities, in the cloud are actually starting to happen already. It's kind of like the earthquake. By the time you hear about it, it's happened. But secondly, these discontinuities happen all the time. And so we know that these technical major discontinuities from the technology perspective happen every 10 or 15 years. And what we do know is that there'll be another one after the cloud, and another 10 years from time we'll be sitting in a similar room talking about the next level of discontinuity that's happened. But the same thing happens in the applications that you're building today. So when I look at architecture, one of the questions I get asked often is, so what is it? And we've kind of put this definition together. It's the definition of a constrained set of degrees of freedom to drive predictable, repeatable, mitigated solutions. An application architecture is taking every possible API that you can use and being very prescriptive about how to write an application in a particular way. That's actually been the computing model for many years. I'll date myself a little, but if you go back to COBOL and CICS and DB2 on a mainframe, part of the success of COBOL was that there were not that many ways of writing it. And in fact, in the end, there were millions and millions of people writing great COBOL code, writing banking applications that really have been used for a long, long time. And one of the things about Windows Azure is actually an application architecture host. You have to write your application in a particular way. And if you write your application in that way, we'll give you all of those services that I talked about. But you have to follow the programming model, and the programming model is the prescription. And so architecture is about looking at a set of problems and constraining the degrees of freedom so that you get repeatability and predictability in the work that you're doing. So imagine, and I'm sure all of you do this at some point in time, you go do a study on, whether you're in an enterprise, on the existing systems that you've got, or if you're an ISV, you look at your own architecture. And there's a picture like this that you can draw, which says, all of our systems are interconnected in strange, wonderful ways. None of our databases are coherent. The schemas don't necessarily match. Data is replicated and duplicated all over the place. And then you go to this priority and planning board, or you go to a VC, and you say, but if you invest in me and give me some large sum of money, we'll produce this beautiful architecture. All the databases at the bottom, there's a wonderful message bus in the middle, and all the systems are lined up in front, and everything is safe and wonderful. Now, they give you the money, you build that application, but what happens 10 years later? 10 years later, you're sitting in the same room having the same discussion. And so one of the things that we've discovered is that architectures are organic. In other words, when you've done a design, architectures do not stay the same. The day that you build it is when it starts to change. And understanding how architectures change, why they change, why are systems moving, is very important to understanding the bets that you make from an architectural perspective, the bets that you make in terms of defining those systems. So architecture is actually part art, part science, and the really hard part, it's the balance between the two. The science part is about identifying architectural artifacts. It's about identifying the places where you're going to make a big bet. So when you're going to build a new system, design a new solution, migrate something that you've got today, you actually decide you're going to spend some money. And when you spend that money, what you're trying to figure out is, what are you going to bet on? And bet means write a check. Now, what's important about the bet is you're betting on an artifact that's durable. It might be a database, it might be a vendor, it might be an architecture, it might be a class library, it might be the idea that we're going to do reusable user interfaces. But what is the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're going to bet on? That's good because you know where to invest your time and money. What's also good about it is you know that the other elements that are there are kind of throwaway, and you need to think about your time and money investment as throwaway towards those other pieces. Now, throwaway might mean 1 or 2 years, but it still means that you have the ability to decide where to invest time and money and where to invest less time and money as that sort of progresses. The second part, the art, is the art of simplicity. It's always amazing when you've finished a project, any good architect, any good designer, the first thing they want to do is go back and redo it because they know everything that they did wrong and they know what they could have done better. And the simplicity is the ability to express a problem in a very simple form and explain it to somebody so that they can understand what you're trying to do. I see many architecture diagrams that take Visio to the edge, that have overlapping lines and circles and arrows and boxes all over the place. And they probably are accurate, but they don't really convey the essence of the design. It's more of a design spec than an architecture. And there's a difference between those, and the difference between design and architecture is really important. And so it's always easy to, when you see a fantastic design, whether it's an industrial design in a device, a user experience, or building design, it's always easy to stand in front of one and say, that's beautiful, that's simple. It's easy to recognize, but my God, it's really hard to do. And so great architecture is actually about the balance between those two things, and also the balance between technical architecture and designer. And designer, I'm going to broaden that a little bit. I'm a big fan of industrial design and the simplicity of design. And a great design, as I said, is something that's easy to recognize but incredibly hard to do. And I'll give you a simple example. I was talking about this with one of the analysts earlier. There's a fantastic innovation that we did on Windows Phone. It's in the user experience view. If you open up your Windows Phone, you can actually pan the screen back and forth in a display space. Simple idea. What actually happened was that up until that point in time, any application written on a phone, the user experience was limited to that little 4-inch screen. That was a single screen. And one of the changes that's in the Windows Phone interface is that physical screen allows you to pan back and forth in a bigger display space. So when you produce a mobile application, you're no longer constrained by 4 inches, but you can actually have it in multiple of 4-inch screens. Simple idea, seems terribly obvious when you look at it, but nobody else did it. And so that level of design and simplicity is really something that you can always tell a great application of not. The physical example that's similar is when you walk up to a door, how do you know if it opens by pushing or pulling? Sometimes there's the words there that say push and pull, but I know if you're like me, I'm always doing the wrong thing. Even though it says push, I pull. What tells you that a door opens in or out? What are the hints that you can give? So the elements of design and architecture, even when you're deep into technical design, are incredibly important. It's not just about the technical design, but how the pieces hang together. I took this slide from a guy by the name of Bill Buxton, who's a Microsoft researcher. And if you want to have some fun, go to his website, billbuxton.com. He's been around for a long time. He's the guy who drove the original Surface development at Microsoft. He also drove a lot of the underlying messaging, what led to Connect. And he has this view, which I really like, which says it's his T model for knowledge. And he says you have this notion of breadth and depth, but on any particular topic, you have expertise and you have literacy. Expertise means you know what you're talking about. You're the best biz talk guy. And literacy means that you have that breadth of information, but not necessarily the depth. And so when he looks at great solutions, he thinks that you need to follow this T model. Most of us today think that the T model is about technology. You know one or two technologies deeply and a bunch of them in a sort of horizontal, literate way. But his view is that there's two more dimensions that are needed. The first one is design, in that same view of breadth and depth. And then the second one is business. Tough thing to introduce to a technical audience, but it's pretty important to understand what your users are looking for and how they use them. And so his belief in the T model is it's actually more like a pie model than a T model, and that it's a combination of business, technology, and design of what makes great technical people. And it's that breadth that needs to expand. It's not so much about depth, although it is important, but it's also about breadth. So one of the interesting things about architects is that there's these religious battles about whose methodology are you using. And the real answer is, I don't care. Methodology is actually not a religion. Methodology is generally intended to provide a common view, a common perspective on describing and articulating a system of components and subcomponents and how they interact with one another. And I see way too much going on where people are really thinking about the religion of methodology as opposed to what are we really trying to do? And it turns out that one of the most commonly used case tools that's used to describe systems or articulate systems is either Visio or PowerPoint. And neither of those is a methodology tool. And in some cases, they're overused. In some cases, they're underused. But as you're thinking about systems and the description of systems, don't spend too much time thinking about the language that you use to describe them. Because architecture is about a language. Architecture is about a language to describe a system and a tool to help you make decisions. Architecture is not an end. It's a means. And the means is to actually build great solutions that are reliable and durable and sustainable, that provide great value to your users. It's not necessarily the end itself. Finally, again, I'll date myself a little bit. Architecture is about the expression of wisdom. It's about having seen this before somewhere else or seen something that looks like this something else and being able to use that experience to be predictive of failure. I had a meeting. We run internally an event called Tech Ready, which is like Tech Ed, but just internally, and we do it twice a year. And there was a session with all the architects, about 400 of them. And I did a little session much like this. And I said to them the following, for a sales guy, it's very simple to know whether you're succeeded or not. You make your quota, you don't make your quota. You don't make your quota for 2 years, you probably need to go somewhere else. What does failure like that mean to a technical guy? What does failure actually mean? How do you know when you've succeeded? And how do you know when you failed? And how do you know when you're kind of sitting in the middle? And so the wisdom of understanding solutions and how they're put together is incredibly important around this prediction of uncertainty and really trying to avoid failure. I have a team who works for me that does what we call technical quality assurance, TQA, that does project reviews both at the design time as well as during the project on large complex projects that we do around the world. And we've actually got some amazing data about what causes projects to fail. And interesting enough, in most cases, it's scope and scope control and estimation. It has nothing to do with the amount of memory in the server and the threading model and the connection model and the statelessness. That's all technical problems we can solve. Some of the things that the two highest factors that impact failure of projects is estimation and scope, because we're all engineers and we all love to build systems and really don't have the courage to go back to the customer and say, that's not really what you asked for. What you asked for was this. If you're asking me for that, that's a change. We don't have the ability to do that because it is not in the DNA of developers and engineers to get there. And then finally, architecture is about this visual simplicity that I talked about, being able to look at a piece of wallpaper and have it make sense to you as opposed to be a design spec. So what's the point? What's the real business value of architecture? How durable are the architectures that you produce? We know that they're not very durable in general, and they have a much shorter half-life because of this organic nature of architectures. And why does technical innovation cause architectural discontinuities? We love to be on the edge. We love to create things that are interesting. And it tends to be that most of those are the things that cause architectural discontinuities rather than repeatable, predictable solutions. So let's talk about what leadership means. The first thing is that leadership is a journey. I can't tell you that today you are one and tomorrow you're not one. It actually is a journey, and for many of us, it's actually a fairly long journey that has many stops in it. Many stops that have different kinds of exposures, different systems, different roles. I I'll ask many architects who are designing systems, when was the last time you worked as an operator running some of the stuff that you produce? Because the answer is not very often, and there's not very much that's done in applications today to help them run. And I'll ask the rhetorical question to all of you, which is, in the applications that you've built recently, how much time have you spent thinking about diagnostics and telemetry and instrumentation of your application? If you were an operator, that'd be the first thing that you think about, but most of us don't think about that very much. And so exposure to many of the different roles and experiences is incredibly important. One of the things I can tell you is technology leadership is not this. This is a Visio diagram of the current Microsoft portfolio of products, every one of them. And at this Tech Ready event that we run, we generate internally about 1,500 hours of content every 6 months. About 2,500 to 3,000 hours of content a year that articulates a level of depth about all of these things. And technology leadership is not about knowing everything about everything. In fact, you can't do that. It's an impossible task. If you think about the 2,500 hours of content that we produce internally, you could spend your whole working year catching up on what happened last year, just in time to catch up on what happened this year, the next year. And so it's not about that, but it's actually being very selective about what it is you want to know about, and more interestingly enough, who you can get that information from in the areas where you don't. So I used this slide earlier, as you remember. It's a slide about workloads, which says customers deploy solutions, not technology. Whether that's at the infrastructure level or whether it's at the application level or the solution level. This is the thing that people deploy. It's solutions that make money. It's not infrastructure that makes money, and it's not applications by themselves that makes money. It's the business solution that makes money. And so understanding the solution and the value of the solution is really incredibly important. Let me give you an idea. This is a capability map of a data center service. Essentially, if you were going to produce a private cloud, you'd have to have knowledge about all of these technologies and how they interact with one another. Deployment, operations, virtualization, identity management, provisioning, security, all of those elements to build a private cloud. Pretty tough for anybody in one person to have all of this stuff in their heads. And even if they did, where does governance lie? In other words, when you produce this complex design, who's accountable for the design and all the pieces fit together? And so the work that we've done says we need to have some people who actually are deep in individual technologies, but we need to have what are called capability leads, who are people who cross over. In this case, a data center capability, who's somebody who has the breadth in that T model of all of these elements, who draws on the depth of other people to bring this all together. Here's a simple 4-stage career model, and I learned this model when I worked for Exxon 30 years ago. It says in any career, and let me start off back, sorry, in any lifetime, we all have multiple careers. Many of you have worked at multiple companies. I worked at Exxon, then at Microsoft, so I've had at least 2 careers, in fact more. So in any lifetime, you have multiple careers. When you go into a new career, whether it's inside the same company or somewhere else, you come in as an apprentice. In other words, you have no idea what you're doing in that context. You might be an expert somewhere else, but in that context, you're a novice, you're an apprentice. The next step is you're a journeyman, which essentially says you really understand how to do that job well. You understand what's in the job, who you interact with, who you talk to, but you still are about that individual job. The third step is getting success through others, and the fourth step is success through strategy. And this tends to be a very narrow pyramid at the top that's designed. Here's the dilemma. Crossing that chasm from being a great individual contributor to somebody who gets success through others is huge. We make this error, and I'm sure many of your companies make this a similar mistake, which is we take somebody who's just a great developer, say, congratulations, you're a development manager. No idea what they're doing as a manager, no concept of what it means to manage people. But even if you make somebody a development lead, they're not necessarily managing, but leading means how you influence other people and what they do. Even then, it's sort of inconsistent. And this is really the gist of where we've spent a lot of time thinking about how is it that we take people across that chasm? How do we take people who are great individually at what they do? And you need many of those people. I'm not saying that they're not necessary by any means. You need people who have that. But you also need people who are leaders who get success through others. And that's, to a large degree, the essence of what we're trying to do. So technical leadership. You have to think about the core axioms of your business before you get to technical leadership. excuse the math analogy, but you need to understand what you believe in and what you don't believe in. So do you believe in repeatable and predictable? And how is that, what is the tension that that creates with innovation? Because innovation is 180 degrees out of phase with predictability. Innovation is about having a jolly good old time to produce something that nobody else has done, and repeatable is having a jolly good old time to produce something that is predictable and will do exactly what you said will do. And those things that tend to be in conflict with one another. Similarly, around creating long-term supportable solutions. The comment I made earlier about instrumentation, for example. How much do you think about the durability of the programs that you're writing today? A silly example. Many of you have inkjet printers, and you've printed out all of your wonderful pictures using inkjet printers. That's going to decay at some point. Actually, what's even worse is that many people have writable CDs where they stored stuff on writable CDs 10 years ago. I don't know if any of you have tried to read some of those CDs, but they're not always readable. And so thinking about the durability of the assets that you've got is really important. And to some degree, there's this notion of disposability when you think about the CD-ROMs or the pictures. But think about that in the software that you write. What is the durability of the software that you write? How long do you expect your software to last? A week, 6 months, 6 years? There's some great mainframe software out there that's been running for 20, 30, 40 years. How long is your software going to last for? And do you really think about that? Do you actually think about the life cycle of your software and the durability of your software? Which I believe is just an incredibly important thing. Thinking about the long-term life, because in many cases, it's the immediacy of what can I do this week as opposed to the longer-term view. And so this part of it, I'm going to get into the series of behaviors, and I'm going to move through some of this quickly, and I'll talk about some. But I left them in just to give you the complete list. The first thing about starting to be a leader is knowing your job and just being great at what you do. I spend a lot of time with new hires into Microsoft, both junior and senior folks, and this is probably my single biggest feedback to them. Just be great at what you do. If it's uncomfortable, if you have difficulty dealing with the people around you, make sure that you're the one who's doing great work, because that'll give you the gateway to allowing you to be moved, to allow you to move within the company. But this final point is really important about don't be a victim. Many times I'll hear, I can't do this and I can't do that because, a whole list of reasons because. It actually doesn't matter. Don't be the victim to what other people do. You really control it yourself and need to take advantage of it yourself and really look at it and say, am I doing everything that I can do to get through this? Secondly is know your customer. Not only your customer, but your customer's customer's customer, their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers, the whole value chain, understand the products, the business, the vision. And so one of the things that I'll do with some of our senior folks when we'll do a project review, it's a project review about a hardware store. This is a real story, but I'll save the names to protect the innocent. A guy who's doing a messaging system, an exchange system inside of one of the big hardware providers, a global company. And we were talking about the system. I said, so why does a worldwide global hardware company need messaging? And he was much more interested in talking to me about storage on the messaging system and reliability of the MTAs. I'm like, but why do they need messaging? Why does a hardware, actually, let's back off. Why does this particular company exist? The company was Home Depot, I'll tell you. Why does the company exist? It's just easier to talk about. Why does this company exist? What is it they do? He couldn't answer the question, which for me is unbelievably important. How can you think about building a messaging system if you don't understand what the company does? The lead-in is Home Depot does two things. One, they keep inventory. In other words, when you're doing a little home renovation and you need to go get a window or some putty or a screw or a screw, you can go to Home Depot and they're going to have it. Might not be the best, might not be the worst, but they're going to have the one or two things that you need. So their first game is inventory. Their second game is they're a bank, because to contractors, to plumbers and contractors and builders, they actually are a bank because they loan them money so that the contractor can buy the plumbing supplies and sell them to you as the consumer. So they do two things. They're a bank and they keep inventory. Why do they need messaging? So it's very, very important to understand the application and how it's going to deplete and the core essence of the company about what they do. You have to know their language. You have to know the language of the business that you're talking about, the language of the user, the language that they use. And if you're producing a social networking system today that's targeted at millennial teens, you need to understand their language. It's very difficult for somebody who's 45 years old to build a system that's targeted at 27 years old. Son of a friend of ours works at Facebook. It's fascinating listening to the stories that he says. Average age, 27. He's 26. It's very easy for somebody who's 26 to build systems for other people who are 26. A little more difficult for people who actually don't live and die and sort of work on those systems all the time. So understand and speak the language. Think strategically about what you're doing and the value to the company. Think about trust relationships that you need to build with the customer and synthesize. When you're thinking strategically, you need to be synthesizing across all the models that you see, across all of these alternate approaches that you see, to really help you, in this case, drive to impact. What is the result of what you're doing? And there's lots and lots of dimensions to this. Just a couple of examples. We see many people going for big bangs as opposed to lots of little bangs. Agile application development in the right way, used in the right place, is fantastically useful about how to show incremental success in a project. However, it's not the only methodology to be used for all applications. Stopping is actually really hard, but incredibly important. Knowing when things are going wrong and knowing when to stop and when to call it out is an amazing thing to do. And as I talk to managers and technical managers, a lot of my feedback to them is much the same, which is they need to give the people who are working on these projects permission to stop. It's hard for the manager to say stop because they don't have enough data, not enough information. And so giving people permission to say stop is a massively important thing. Learning about future relevance. We talked this morning about the cloud, and part of the message was, if you think the cloud is coming, you're wrong, the cloud is here. Keep current. And the only way to keep current is to do it. And so I spent a ton of time traveling around the world, but technically, I'm pretty much up to date. I actually run all the beta software on my machines. I don't have a technical assistant who does it and gives it to me. I do it all myself because the only way you can learn it, the only way you can understand it, is if you've got your hands on it. And if you're looking with it, if you're playing with it, and you're understanding it. And so learning is incredibly important. But learning is not only about what you do, it's learning about what other people are doing and synthesizing from them, and then trying to assess these patterns. You'll see this notion of synthesis of patterns on many, many of these topics. Great leaders are people who can look at several discontiguous ideas, notions, images, and start to knit them together and pattern match across them in some way. There's this interesting brain cell thing that goes on that says, this looks familiar to that, and I can pull these things together and do the third thing. It's a very common theme that we see in some of our great leaders. Listening all the time to everybody, no matter whether they're junior or senior, listening is incredibly important. Listening to what people have got to say. The other guy's job is always hard, something that my father taught me many years ago. It's very easy to think to critique somebody else about what they do, but listen to what they say, listen to what they're experiencing, and really trying to empathize with them about what's going on. And the hard part, as you're taking all this input, is deciding and evaluating what you keep, what you discard, what has value and what doesn't have value. And part of that is building up the network of people around you so that you actually know who your trusted sources are. So if there's a topic area you don't know about, it's the ability to go to somebody else and inquire from them their opinion, and knowing that that opinion is trusted and valuable and complete, because there's no ways that you can be complete yourselves. Collaboration and sharing is on multiple dimensions. And the reality is it starts off with you. If you start to collaborate and share, other people will. But the general attitude of most technical people when I talk to them about sharing is, I love sharing. I think it's incredibly important. In fact, I have a whole lot of stuff that you need. I'm okay. I don't need anything from you, but I've got stuff that you need. And so inherently, personalities in the technology industry who tend to be a little bit on the type A build tend to think that sharing is about what they've got to others and not necessarily pulling from other people. It's a characteristic of the industry that we're in for some bizarre reason. The open source organizations, whether they're public open source or many of the things that we even do in-house, are really still fundamentally about a handful of people directing traffic, which is insane when you get all of this incredible capability coming together. But it still tends to be a handful of people, Linus Torvalds or others, saying yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, no, no. And so the ability to collaborate starts with you. What's really important when you collaborate is this part at the bottom about burning bridges. This is a personal belief that I have, which is never leave broken glass behind. It's a bad idea because you never know when you're going to have to walk back across that path. This is a model that we took about websites and collaboration sites and blogs and forums. And it characterizes the different roles of different people. And it's really interesting. I mean, each one of you, when you look at that, think about some of the forums where you go to participate. And where do you sit? Most of us, myself included, are lurkers. We go to sites and look. But how many of us actually contribute? How many of us critique? And how many people create? And this is a very fastly declining balance when you get to the center of this particular chart, about how many people are actually co-creators, how many people are people who take other information and use it and morph it and actually add incredible value. Creators are hard. There's not that many creators. There are lots of people who can take something that somebody else has created and aggregate it with something else and actually make something new. But the base level of innovation is really, really difficult. Invention is one thing, and innovation is something else, and creation is incredibly important. Another dimension that we look at from our technical leaders is about what are you doing about others? Mentoring people from diverse communities, whether it's diverse male, female, religion, geography, country, age. Getting opinions from others is incredibly, incredibly important, particularly others who don't think like you. Now, unfortunately, most of us, when you ask an opinion, you go knock on the office of the guy next to you and ask him what he thinks, and he's going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. In some cases, it's actually better to go to somebody else in another world and actually talk to them. We also look, frankly, to optimism. Optimism breeds optimism, and pessimism breeds pessimism. Craig Newberg, who's the guy from Craigslist, very interesting guy. Go look up at some of the stuff that he said. He's just fascinating in some of the stuff that he's done. One of his core beliefs, and he's written a book about this, is give the other guy a chance. You can't always be right, neither can he. And so if somebody makes a mistake, give him a chance. It's actually really interesting. He's written some stuff on this. I don't want to repeat it, but it's worthwhile doing a search and finding it just to go get a perspective on what it is about being optimistic and helping others. Being visible is actually also important. Being visible to the people around you, being visible, frankly, to your management, being visible horizontally, being visible elsewhere is incredibly important. Think about your visibility in your company, in your industry, at an event like this as an incredible opportunity. Each one of you needs to think about your own personal marketing plan. And so when I meet with mentees or people who I'm working with, one of the suggestions that I'll make with them is to go do a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, threats, model, SWOT analysis. Go do a SWOT analysis on yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your threats about impacting your life? And build a marketing plan about how you're going to market, who you are and what you do that's going to address the threats and opportunities that you've got. What's going to make you stand out from the crowd? I do a fair amount of work in India, which is fascinating. I love going there, and I learn just a tremendous amount every time I'm there. The desire to differentiate what I do versus 3 million people behind me is unbelievable. It's something that you don't see in any other country, no matter where you are. The desire to be visible and to differentiate is huge, and I think all of us need to just be very careful and watch what's happening there. Make visibility part of your plan. Perfect example. You've got an event over here, and there are 170 tracks. Be a speaker. Each and every one of you has something incredible, some story, some technology that you can talk about. It's easy to sit in the audience, a little harder to sit up here and talk, but do it. That is your opportunity to be visible, whether that's something that's external like this or, frankly, something that is internal. At the same time as being visible, it's about being conscious. It's about being conscious in the meeting about who you are, where you are, who's with you, who's around you. It's always interesting speaking at a session like this because I actually, with the lighting on, I can actually see many of you, and I'm pretty conscious of the reactions that I'm getting. I actually love in this kind of audience because I can actually get a lot of body language that's giving me an idea of are people following or not. Be conscious of what's around you. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to communicate? And the hardest thing when you're being in a scenario like this is deciding when to back off and when to change what it is that you're doing. An interesting side note I'll give you about that. most of my slides, some that I used this morning, are all pictures as opposed to text. These are very full of text because there's words we wanted to convey. But most of my slides are pictures, and the reason is I can say anything I like to the image, and it actually, in the audience, you won't know, and I actually use I use the same slides for different audiences, but the spiel and the pitch that goes with it changes. That allows me to adjust in real time. Because when I put up a slide like this, all of you are reading it. I guarantee you that all of you are actually reading the lines there. And so if you actually have words in a slide, be very careful because everybody's going to expect you to address each one of the 5 bullet points on the slide. And so I use images to do that, and it's about being, as I said, being conscious in the room. Working the right things in the right way, be selective, be patient. A great quote from David Vaskovich, who is the Microsoft CTO I worked for 10 years. He left Microsoft a couple of years ago. We always overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Actually true of technology. When you actually think ahead 10 years, we always underestimate it. But boy, are we aggressive about what we can do in 1 year. And we talk about that too much. And really, being selective and being patient. In other words, you don't have to do everything every time. Decide what you're going to do. Make sure that the things that you pick are the things that you have a good shot at being successful at, and do it. And in some cases, there's some things that you're not going to do, but that's actually okay. You'll get around to them. Do the things where you can be successful and where you can make an impact. But when you do that, you need to be self-aware. And not only self-aware, frankly, you need to be self-critical. And self-critical means you need to step back and really look at what you're doing and be truthful with yourself about what's going on. But frankly, find people who will be critical of you, who will give you the feedback. I've had a busy 2 days so far. I came in on Monday morning, and Microsoft local guys have been running me ragged, which I love. I've met lots of customers, lots of people internally. Most of the meetings have gone really great. One of them didn't yesterday. I was kind of disappointed in it, and actually wrote a mail this morning back to the subsidiary manager here in New Zealand, to Paul, and said, like, I'm really sorry, but the meeting went like this. I behaved like that. I'm sorry it happened. This is what I would have done differently. I didn't have this much data with me. You have to be able to do that. No matter who you are, you have to be critical of what you're doing yourself. Learning how to influence is an interesting thing. It's about influencing without accountability, without responsibility. And it's easy to influence the people who are below you in the organization. In some cases, it's easy to influence the people who are with you in the organization. But influencing someone who doesn't care about you, who's in a different part of the world, whether they're a customer or a manager in another group, that's something that is incredibly valuable. It's a learned skill, and it's a paced environment. And really understanding the influence that you can have and how to help somebody else see it your way is incredibly difficult, but unbelievably important. And part of it, as I said, is giving credit where credit is due. It's, to some degree, collecting the political capital that you need and making sure that when you want to take a position on something, that you can actually go over to somebody and say, look, I really need you to do this for the following reasons, and have that real discussion with them. And this ability to influence others is incredibly important. As you think about that, you also need to be able to think more broadly, not just about the tactical pieces that you're doing, but think of the whole problem as the aggregate of solutions, the aggregate of elements that go into this broader solution. What would you do with these individual elements? Would you be in this business? In other words, if you're building an application for somebody, would you be your own customer, for example? Some interesting things to think about. And then a final track that talks about balance. You've heard me use these words, predictable, repeatable, often. We've built this model that we use inside of our business today. So Microsoft has something called trustworthy computing. It's a model that we have which describes the behaviors that we're expecting from our people and that we communicate to customers around security and behaviors of us as a company. It essentially came out of some things that happened in the 1990s. And we've taken that model and said, what happens if we take trustworthy computing and turn it into trustworthy delivery? What are the core pillars of trustworthy delivery? And that means as all of us are building applications, what are the axioms that you think about? So the way I think about axioms, the math example again, is when you're struggling to make a decision, the axioms allow you to sit back and say, what are the core beliefs that I have that's going to cause me to think about this decision and change it and really potentially come up with something different? And so we think that there are 4 key pillars. There's probably more because this is a work in progress. One is the predictability of the delivery, predictability, repeatability. The second one is innovation. The balance between those two is where the nightmare happens. When do you innovate and when are you repeatable? Sustainable, I talked a little bit about that, which is how do you make solutions sustainable? How do you engineer solutions for health? And then finally, capable. Capable in this sense means do you have the facilities to build the thing that you're designing? Do you have the ability to build out this infrastructure or build this application? Or actually, are you winging some of it? And one of the things that we do see fairly often is people designing things that are not buildable, whether it's infrastructure or apps. So you have to be sure that the things that you're trying to do can be realistically achieved, either by you or through somebody else. So then attached to that is the drive, once you've got that set of axioms, is the drive to make it happen. How do you work the problem? How do you work the people around you? How do you, as I said earlier, not be the victim, but in fact be the driver to getting the things done that you need to get done? When do you seek help? And frankly, a little bit of progress in steps is actually much better than none. And together with that, there's nobody who owns your success and your career and your leadership but you. Don't look to other people. You have to make those decisions. The introspection that you need to have about where you are and who you are, what your skills are, what skills need to be developed, that really belongs with you. It doesn't belong with your manager. It doesn't belong with your family. You're going to have good discussions with them. That's incredibly important. But frankly, it resides with you. And when you think about what you want to do next, don't think about recognition. Recognition is great. We all love recognition. But it's really the opportunity, and it's the opportunity for you to do things, the opportunity for you to change, frankly, the opportunity to impact what you're doing, and the opportunity to impact what others are doing. And really understanding that is pretty clear. Part of that, frankly, is having an opinion. It's being able to go into a meeting and having an opinion and being able to defend the opinion. Many cases, I'll go into meetings where I'll get the typical engineering response, which is on the one hand, you could do this, on the other hand, you could do that, and on the third hand, something else. Be clear. Be confident when you have to be. And if you're not confident, don't have an opinion. Have a discussion, but not necessarily an opinion. When we do these interviews around career development, part of that board review is we'll ask people, they've got 15 minutes of the hour in the review to tell us what you're passionate about. And you know something? I don't care what it is, but I want to see that you can tell me something, anything that you care about. I want to see the passion that you've got for it. We did one of these recently, and we had one of our senior architects from Slovenia come through one of these boards. And the thing that he was passionate about, would go over well here, was making coffee. And he gave us a 15-minute dissertation on the design of coffee machines and the importance of having the right barometric pressure in the coffee machine, who the manufacturers were, and the difference between the coffee that you'll get from different machines. I love that, because people care. They've taken the time to understand what it is, why it works, what the elements are, what the surface area looks like of the problem set that they're working on, and they can communicate it. Incredibly, incredibly important. And then finally, it's about courage. It's about the courage to take the stand and not back off. It's the courage to test your conviction. It's the courage, I'll give you a simple example. We had a meeting earlier in the week with a company that was talking to me about the consumerization of IT and what's happening to Microsoft and how come you're not innovating. I listened to them in the meeting. It was a very nice meeting. It was actually a very sort of balanced meeting. And I said to them, well, how come you guys haven't migrated from Windows XP? You've actually had Windows XP for 10 years. You're comparing Windows XP to products available from from other suppliers today that's 10 years later. Why don't you compare new and modern products to each other? So how come you guys haven't done that? You have to have the ability and the conviction and the courage to ask the tough questions when they need to be asked, and the wisdom, frankly, to back off when you need to. So I'll get a little personal for a while. This is about me. Knowing your core beliefs is incredibly important to knowing who you are and what you want to do. But not only that, communicating them. What we find in organizations is that people are very protective of what they believe in. They're very protective about communicating what they believe in, just in case somebody might not agree. But what really happens is the people around you are guessing what you believe in. They're guessing what your core values are. And if they've guessed wrong, you get this incredible impedance mismatch between what you believe and what they think you believe that causes incredible stress in the organization. So it's important to do this. I wrote a blog internally a while ago on this, and we've compressed it into a page. But this actually says a lot about me, and it's important for people to communicate it. I've been at Microsoft for 21 years. The reason that I'm there is because I love the technology. I love living on the edge of the technology and being part of a company that you can impact hundreds of millions of people around the world is a fantastic thing. I believe in the magic of technology, the power of the customer. Part of what I do is actually look at many, many customer scenarios and actually synthesize that back to the product groups for scenario-based product planning. But what's interesting is not only the power of the customer, but their right to be right. It's very easy to sit down with a Microsoft program manager and you tell them what a particular customer wants, and the program manager says, yeah, but that's not, I don't believe them. In many cases, when somebody is using our technology or your solution, if they can't make something work, it's probably something that's wrong with the product, the documentation, or whatever it is. I also believe in the power of teams. The power of teams, the power of the individual, the power of family, and family is actually two things. Family is my family, my wife, my kids, the people around me. But your family at work, you spend more time with the people at work than you probably spend with your family at home. And the people around you and the importance of the connection with them is unbelievably important. I believe in diversity, I believe in learning, and I believe in teaching and explaining. It's one of the things that I love doing. Transparency, the power of the connection, the emotional connection of community and people, and the ability to communicate with each other in who we are and what we do together. Very important that I think we all communicate this. And so as you think about your own careers and where you want to be, think about what you might write for this. At one of those Tech Ready events, what we did is we built a logical block, a wall for blogs. And we, kind of like a Facebook thing, but a real wall. It was actually a physical wall. And we allowed people to go in and write what they believe in. And it's kind of fascinating because not everybody believes the same thing, interestingly enough. But what's more important about it is the understanding of what we each believe and the people around us believe and the ability to actually communicate about them. So when I go back to technical leadership, it's actually four things. It's part art, part science, the balance, and the key element for me is the courage to actually have the courage of your convictions to actually go through that. Okay, I've been talking for a long time. Any questions about this or anything else, actually? I'll take anything we got. Where are we? Yes?
You said that one of the big things in this message is about courage.
Yeah.
In your long experience, what is the hardest thing you ever had to tell a company that they didn't want to believe?
So I'll repeat the question for the video, which is, in my years and years and years of experience in multiple industries, what's the toughest scenario that I've had to deal with to explain to somebody to...
They believed something you knew that wasn't.
It wasn't the case? Yeah.
And you had to stand up.
There's actually lots of good examples, and I'll tell you, I'll actually give you a couple. One of them is actually around people management. I manage a decent number of people. 50 people now, it goes up to 500, it depends on what it is. The hardest conversation to have at a personal level with somebody is where they believe that they've been super successful and you believe that they haven't. And happens all the time. And it's much easier if that's been discussed during the year as per things that we got. But to actually come to that milestone and have that conversation is incredibly difficult. I'll give you some technical sort of scenarios, some product planning scenarios. So there's a US compliance requirement called FIPS, which is actually a government requirement to make sure that systems actually have the right level of governance implemented and automated in the systems. And that governance standard is actually implemented by multiple governments around the world. And so generally, if you meet the US FIPS requirement, you can actually meet everybody else. In the 2007 wave of the Office products, everything was FIPS compliant, which means that our collaboration suite could be sold into governments around the world without a problem. Turns out in the 2010 series, everything is but SharePoint. And SharePoint is not FIPS compliant. And the work is going on right now, but it's going on because of the meeting I'm going to describe to you. So we went back to the product group, and said, you guys have obviously you haven't thought about this. This is a terrible mistake. But not having SharePoint be FIPS compliant is really cutting us off in the public sector from a massive opportunity around the world. And the guys who run the SharePoint business looked at us and said, look, don't think we didn't think about this. We're not that silly. We did think about it, but we actively made a decision that we didn't think is important. And what you're doing is you're coming back to us and telling us that we were wrong and that it actually is important. So we said, hang on. We went away for a couple of days. We got a whole bunch of data which said, actually, we do think it's important because here's the list of customers and here's the list of opportunities that we think we're going to miss because of it. So now you decide whether your decision was right or not, or wrong or not, but I'll give you the data where I think you're wrong and you need to fix it. A lot of haranguing around. The product group said, yeah, we're going to go do it. They're in the middle of doing that right now. But actually having that discussion with them, which said, I understand that you guys made a decision, but it was wrong. And frankly, there's many of those that happen all the time. Because when you're building products, individual feature definitions decay down to a program manager who owns that product, that feature set. And they're making decisions all the time, every day, about what to include and what to exclude. I mean, the core competency of a company like Microsoft is running massive engineering software projects, and the ability to make coherent decisions is incredibly important. But very, very often, there are decisions that are made in strange ways. And my job, to many degrees, is to go to those guys and say, I understand what you did, but you're wrong. And here's why. But having the voice of the customer with me, and not just one customer, being able to look at that from multiple customers, and actually being able to present that data is credible with a real backing in a business case, is incredibly powerful to use the voice of the customer. And that's what I do. But I'm in many, many of those meetings. It's like that. Yes? Yes. Okay. So the question is, when you're actually having a performance discussion with somebody who works with you, is how do you bridge that belief gap about their belief and your belief? The most valuable thing is evidence. And it's not only evidence that you have, but evidence of everybody else that's involved. And frankly, when those situations arise, and they're always going to arise, you're always going to have a spectrum. As they arise, part of what I'll do is actually solicit input from as many stakeholders as I can, above, peers, and below, to actually aggregate that evidence together, because opinion doesn't count for anything. Yes, as the manager, in many cases, my opinion is going to be the one that will be there, but that doesn't make for a great relationship. I have to be able to present the context and the data. So real evidence is incredibly valuable. You can always debate real evidence. On opinion, you can have a glass of wine, but that's about it. Yeah? Often, frequently, yes. You cannot believe how much stuff that we do internally that we pull the plug on. Our methodology internally inside of Microsoft is very Darwinian. We will actually have multiple teams doing similar things, and at some point in time, we'll shoot one or two of them. Put them out of their misery and decide somebody wins. The hard part is the managers deciding who wins. But absolutely, it's actually more than okay to fail as long as you learn the lessons of the failure. I'm a big fan of history and learning the lessons of history. And if you're going to repeat those lessons, I don't need to go on, but yeah. So failure is great. Failing exactly the same way multiple times is a big no-no. Every day. There's some things that I've done. I've managed a bunch of interesting teams. I've had to cut back groups for business reasons, which I hate doing. There's a business case which says we don't want to be in this business or we do want to be in this business. And I actually hate those decisions, and I'm super, super cautious of those. Probably there's many. I'm not going to stand by that. But one of them, we had a product under development for a long time, which was a repository. There was actually going to be a product. We did an acquisition of some companies, Platinum Technology, SourceSafe, and others. And we were building a repository that was going to be the same category as the IBM 80 cycle repository of way back when. I was managing that development team. And we were spending money like crazy trying to ship a product. But in the end, we didn't quite know what to do with it as a product. And we burned probably 2.5 years developing the technology and developing the product without really understanding enough about the addressable market. It was a great technical exercise, but we didn't understand the market. In the end, it's always interesting in the end, but in the end, the conclusion that we did is it's not a product, it's a technology that actually is buried inside of multiple products today. So inside of our business intelligence product, you'll actually find a repository. It's not a product, but it's buried in there. The thing that we were a little too emotionally attached to was being part of a product. And having said, I've shipped something. And it was hard to get out of that mode because you get so driven into the rhythm of the delivery, the milestones, and getting it done that we forgot about why we were doing it. And that happens all the time. You actually get so engrossed and emotionally attached to the effort that you actually forget about why. Lots of cases like that. Anything on this side here? Can't see. Yeah, in the middle. How do I guarantee the support that my team is not what, sorry? Oh, great question. How do you guarantee that the support that you're getting from your team and frankly those around you is not because your business card has a fancy title on it? It actually, hard to say it in a particular way, but I will. Who you are and how you interact with people is so unbelievably important. My relationship with many of the people who work with me and for me, frankly, is as a peer. If there's a tough decision that has to be made, I'll make it. But in reality, when we go into a meeting and a discussion, I'm part of the wallow of the discussion. I'm not going to dictate anything. There's an interesting consequence of that. And frankly, I'm probably more of the exception than the rule. But I've had people working with me today who've worked with me for 15 years, the same people. As I've moved around the company, there's this drag that comes behind, where there are a lot of the people who work with me today are the people who've worked with me for 10, 15 years. And it's because of the amazing relationships that we have. The bandwidth of the conversation is unbelievable. When we're in a room and it's a bunch of people working with one another, who've worked with it, the conversation is just so fast that for somebody new to come in, it's quite difficult to be able to keep pace with the information flow. But a lot of it comes from, it's not about the power, but it's about the IQ and what you can offer other people to make them successful. Where are we on time? I have no idea where we're on time. 2 minutes left? Thanks. Yeah? How do I manage the distance between business and development? It's actually really tough. One of the things that we try and focus on, we have a bunch of really great technical people. In fact, we have some amazing technical people. Thank God we've got them developing Windows and Office and all this other stuff. Most of those guys are not business people. I think from my perspective, if I actually go back to some levels of core competencies, understanding, as I talked about, the business dimension and the engineering dimension is incredibly important. And being able to articulate that you shouldn't do this engineering thing because of these business reasons, I think is, and that's just logic and the ability to explain and taking the time to explain. Rather than just saying no, it's taking the time to explain. It's a balance. And the best thing to do with it actually is to just demonstrate it, frankly. It's hard because in the end, it's my P&L, it's my budget that's being impacted, and I'm making the hard choices which says, no, you can't go on this trip because we don't have the expense budget. Simple like that. But even something more complicated which says we're not going to develop these features because we have to wait till the next release because we have to ship this product this year. We make those decisions all the time, and they're very hard. What you not do is much easier than what you do. The Windows team today, the team that shipped Windows 7 and the same team that's working on Windows 8, are so brutally well controlled when it comes to this stuff. When they've committed to do something, they're just going to do it, and they'll get it done. It is so well managed. That team is such a large team of developers that is so incredibly well managed. If you want to actually get some background on that, Steven Snofsky, who runs that team, has a book that's been published about the development of Windows 7, going from the Vista era to the Windows 7 era, that was written by Steven Snofsky and one of the lecturers at the Harvard Business School. It'll really give you a great insight about how one person can impact 3,000 or 5,000 engineers in what they're doing. It's really he wrote a series of blogs during the project as events were happening. And then this book is about going back and looking at the blogs and articulating. It's a great book, really worthwhile to spend a quick read. We're done on time. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for staying. Thanks for listening.